So half a day, Taro from the Marianas Islands. I'm delighted to re-record a presentation I gave, already now last November for the launch of the new Area Studies program. And instead of just re-recording a presentation, I am fortunate and delighted to have a PhD student here also doing her field work, looking at the Marianas Islands, Alba. So we're going to turn it more into a conversation. I'm going to let her introduce herself briefly. Then I'll go ahead and give the 20-minute presentation, and then we'll have a conversation for the rest of our time. So half a day, Alba.
Half a day. So I'm Alba. I'm a PhD student at the Sainsbury Research Unit at UEA. I'm currently in Guam, like Sylvia, which is fantastic that we can have this conversation while we're both out here in the Marianas. And my research focuses on Chamorro artifacts in museum collections in Spain, and also kind of like the revival of ancient traditions here in the Marianas. And I'm a Chase-funded PhD student. Thanks so much, Sylvia.
Yay, this is Masi. All right, so we will jump right into the presentation. I'm going to attempt to share my screen and do all of this.
Yep.
Yep.
That works.
Let's get it perfect. Okay. So previously, I was able to present first for the opening of the new Area Studies Research Center, and that was late at night for me, early in the morning for the folks in the UK. So we're now lucky, Alba and I are both on the same time zone. So half a day, Taro, and greetings from this part of the world, the Marianas Islands, also referred to as the Marianas Archipelago. And it's made up of several islands that I will get into a little bit more in my presentation. I just wanted to share some of these images from a few weeks back, so late in 2023, taken by a friend and colleague, Cami, and I shared the opportunity with her to include some of her images in this presentation. So I just wanted to give her a shout out, and Suzus Masi, she's doing an excellent job documenting the ongoing situation here in the Marianas Islands through her beautiful photography. And thank you for this invitation and to actually be able to present virtually. And I do appreciate being included because often Pacific and Oceania isn't included in events such as this due to our time zone. So I am truly honored to have been included with such an impressive lineup of speakers and to really kick things off. So for full transparency, I only recently became aware of the discipline of area studies. I actually learned about it through this opportunity with the Rutledge Area Studies Impact and Interdisciplinary Awards. I reviewed the application in this call for submissions and was once again not surprised, but that Pacific or Oceania Studies actually wasn't even included in the drop-down menu for the area studies subjects. So that really got me thinking about Pacific studies, area studies, Oceania studies. And to do that, I'm going to share several maps for the next few slides. Some are problematic, which I am aware of, but it gives us a place to start. And I love visuals so much. And just through this award, while I didn't win the award, I appreciate being highly commended and appreciate really the openness and the invitation from area studies folks to help us reconceptualize and think through this region, not just from like a Western gaze with imaginary and arbitrary borders, lines and separations and divisions, but I see area studies as a way to really move past that old way of looking at the region. So to begin, I would like to center the Pacific. This is actually a perspective many of us may not be familiar with. It's really difficult to grasp the magnitude of this expansive area of the planet, the deepest part of the planet, the largest body of water. Often it's referred to as the Pacific Rim, as if there's emptiness in the middle. So really trying to challenge the different conceptualizations, excuse me. And it's a tricky region for folks to relate to. So these are two maps to kind of demonstrate how different nation states conceptualize the region. So for the case of how far are you from France, this concept of sovereign soil through their overseas territories. It's kind of a cheeky map, but it shows just the distance from the actual nation state capital of France. But because of their island state territories, their island territories, France is never really that far away. That's what that map is trying to get at, as well as China's view of the Pacific, which is a ongoing conversation in this region about China's influence, China's power, the United States presence, Taiwan. And this map is showing China's friends in the Pacific. And this is an interesting map for me because it completely leaves off the Marianas Islands, the Federated States of Micronesia. And my guessing is because of our political relationship with the United States. Again, an outsider's conceptualization of the region. This is more from a Southern Hemisphere perspective, still by the settler nation state of Australia, which really focuses on like how near or far or remote the islands are in reference to Australia. However, it is able to kind of resituate some of the islands. It does use the three Micronesia, Polynesia, and Melanesia categories, which is left over from colonial times, which is still used widely today. But again, a different way to think through what is close and what is considered remote. This is a map that is, for me, the most confronting. It shows the United States military training areas, as well as regions controlled by the United States federal government. So the red military training and testing areas include the Marianas Islands over here on the left side in map A. And the yellow are the marine national monuments. And so you will see throughout the entire map that both the red borders and the yellow borders overlap. So this means that these protected areas are also used as training areas for the Department of Defense. And the Department of Defense, the United States Department of Defense, gets exemptions from these environmental protective frameworks, whereas local communities are often feel as though they're restricted because of these national monument frameworks. So a colleague and I have conceptualized really this map of the Pacific where the United States can operate and function across without any borders or jurisdictions as an oceanic security state. So it's essentially the military has full range and can do as it pleases. And this isn't something left over. While some of the borders are left over from World War II, this is current. This is happening right now. We're having a multi-country exercise occur on Guam right now in the Marianas with fighter jets flying over daily. So again, just a different map of showing how the United States conceptualizes the region. And then of course, Micronesia. So this is probably the region that's the most misunderstood or even ignored by the general public, kind of left out within the media, even folks in the United States, while they may be familiar with Hawaii, they are not familiar with Micronesia. Oops. Just trying to zoom in. Yeah. There we go. So frequently when the Pacific is referred to, the folks are often referring to Polynesia. So Hawaii, New Zealand, that's what the media kind of conceptualizes the Pacific as. Often Micronesia is referred to as the American Pacific because of the political relationships with all of the islands here. So the Marianas are located in this archipelago, and this is where Alba and I are today. And these islands are the Federated States of Micronesia. This over here is the Marshall Islands. And then you have the Republic of Palau. So it's linguistically diverse, historically, culturally. It's a very, while micro means many, it's over 2,000 small islands and atolls spread out over many, many miles. Frequently, it's considered the South Pacific, even though we are located 13 degrees above the equator. And even more frequently, it's not even included on maps or visible. And finally, second to last map, just showing how the United States military considers the entire globe, really, under areas of responsibility. So each color section is an area where there's a central command. In our case, for the U.S. Pacific Command area of responsibility, that's located in Hawaii. But we fall under that green area, which is including the majority of Asia and everywhere except Antarctica. Well, this sounds nice. In fact, being under a blanket of area responsibility is not always positive for the local community. And so zooming in on the Marianas Archipelago, so it's 15 islands. We're located next to the Marianas Trench, the deepest part of the planet. This is one final military map where you can see the red circles around the islands, and they are labeled in the key as targets. So these are targets in their military trainings. While the local community feels it actually makes these islands targets to adversaries overseas. We're located on Guam, which is also conceptualized as a bombing target, as well as over 1 million square miles around the islands. This is all happening under the conception of the pivot to the Pacific. This is a very quick overview of massive military plans for the region, which keep shifting and changing. It was first announced in 2006, and it includes the relocation of U.S. Marines from Okinawa, Japan to Guam. And this is due to the ongoing local community resistance due to the sexual violence against the local community by U.S. service people serving in the region. The moving of the Marines to Guam is happening because Guam's political status is a non-self-governing territory, and the U.S. military does not need permission to do such a military project. In fact, the residents of Guam learned about these plans for the island in Japanese newspapers. No one from Guam was present at the negotiations or discussions. Currently, it will include, and the construction has already happened, relocating Marines and a few of their families to Guam, and then the use of the islands to the north as additional bombing targets. So folks on Guam, I am not Indigenous Chamorro. I am a settler here. However, due to living on Guam, as a non-self-governing territory, I lose the right to vote for president. I don't have representation in the US Senate We do elect a delegate to US Congress, but who is non-voting, and essentially considered the longest colonized possession in the world ongoing. The US Constitution does not apply on Guam. So the territory is considered property belonging to the United States, and the US Congress holds this planetary power over the territories as well as the folks living here. If you were surprised by this, you are not alone. The majority of Americans in the continental United States, as well as globally, are not aware. We are not taught about this in our public curriculums or history. This was a long form investigative piece that was published last July in the New York Times Magazine, which did a really good job by first locating the islands and then sharing different narratives, which are usually overlooked when journalists come to the region. And I can share a direct link to this story in future communication. So that was the island of Guam. Moving north, the rest of the islands are in a slightly different political relationship with the United States. That's for historical reasons, which maybe we can talk about in a little bit. What's specifically different about this political arrangement is you have to be indigenous to own land. And so the military footprint, if you will, is very different on these islands than it is on Guam, where anyone can buy land, and the majority of the land is controlled by the United States federal government. But what is the same across all of the islands is the US Department of Defense can impose eminent domain in the name of national security. So while you might feel like you have local control, at any time the Department of Defense can come in and say, we need this for eminent domain. These islands are seen as bombing ranges. This clip shows a group of local lawyers, as well as working with Earth Justice lawyers out of Hawaii, which actually sued the US military and was successful about the plans that the military had put forth for the islands, using them as bombing ranges, restricting fishing rights, restricting airspace, jeopardizing water sources. So this was a campaign that they really came together to raise the issues. So the island of Pagan, the island of Tinian were slated to become, and still potentially could be, bombing ranges. This is what I was able to do my PhD on. I was invited as a PhD student in peace and conflict studies by women resistors here in the Marianas, now almost 12 years ago. The results are published as a free ebook, and it's hosted on the website Guampedia, which is with the University of Guam. And two concepts from my thesis I'd like to share, and I think can really contribute to a new area of studies, one that includes Oceania. There's a direct link between colonial control and escalating militarization. A more decolonized oceanic term rather than transnational or international, because Guam and the islands aren't independent states, is really this transoceanic. So it's more fluid, it's more in touch with Pacific seafaring cultures. It's not only land-based, but it really shows this resilience and reliance on the ocean. And it navigates from this, away from this settler state terminology. So transoceanic honors the ability to connect across large distances of ocean, to foster relationships and support each other's efforts for decolonization and demilitarization. In addition, with that transoceanic relationship and kinship building, the term fluidarity, as opposed to solidarity, was introduced to me by the late Teresia Tawia. And she explained because the people of Oceania have more water and ocean surrounding than any other part of the world, fluidarity best summarizes this collective approach. It includes contemporary resistance and really combines ancient matriarchal principles with new media technologies. So I just want to offer the term transoceanic fluidarity that really describes the undercurrent of digital, legal, political, and spiritual resistance that's happening in the everyday experience here in the Marianas, while expanding militarization continues to creep across Oceania. I am also grateful for this exercise in the presentation because preparing for it, I found a piece written by Dr. Toia from years ago that I hadn't read before. And it actually, she offers insight on and highlights many of the issues that we continue to grapple with today. She invites us to relearn and rethink about the region. And even after a decade of living here, what I've learned is the best way to understand and think about new area studies in Oceania is to really support storytelling from the Marianas by the Marianas. Just briefly, we, along with a few colleagues, we co-founded a nonprofit early in 2023 to do that, to just support storytellers here. We have 3 goals, lofty goals that the organization is hopefully going to be tackling, but really storytelling is central to all of this demilitarization, decolonization work, which I invite area study scholars to really engage with. I'm just going to conclude with this slide. On Guam, the resistance really continues. It's led by the original landowners on the very site where the bombing range is being built. And so what's happening today is actually part of a 500-year history for efforts of decolonization. And we really hope that scholars and educators from off-island will learn more about what scholars and educators from the Marianas are doing. And so to really collaborate through decolonial approaches and provide space to critique and contribute in the region. So I'll just end with an Alamwai Suzusmasi and thank you. I look forward to hearing some thoughts from Alba, and I will be sure to share my contact information also with folks with new area studies so we can continue the conversation. Yay! Let's do this.
A little bit of problem going on here for a minute.
Okay, yeah. Yay.
Okay. You know, dogs on Guam.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Sylvia. That was super interesting.
Yeah.
It was great to hear from you, and especially, you know, for me being here, and, you know, you were mentioning how this week we've had all of the, you know, the military planes flying over, and, you know, we were discussing that the other day when we were together, and we just saw them flying over us multiple times during the day. And yeah, it just makes me wonder, you know, for me, it's different because I'm only here for a few months, but how terrifying it must be for the people living here to be, you know, you never really know when something might happen. And, you know, even earlier I was discussing with our colleague Judy Flores as well, this issue. And, you know, she was saying Guam is, you were mentioning these targets, right? And she was saying, well, she was describing Guam as a target for foreign country. You know, she was just like, we are the closest US territory in, you know, in range for missiles from China, Russia, or even North Korea. So yes, I was wondering if you know, you could expand a little bit more on, you know, what people have shared with you when you've spoken about these issues with them.
Sure. It's a very complex layered history because of the experience. I'll just talk specifically about Guam right now. During World War II, the US military was here before World War II, but they made the decision to evacuate the white military personnel before things started ramping up here in the Pacific. And so the day that Pearl Harbor was surprise attacked by the Imperial Army of Japan, Guam was also bombed. And Guam became, the folks of Guam were prisoners of war for 3 brutal years under the Japanese army. And that wartime experience with atrocities and massacres happening, starvation, all the elements of war, really has an impact on the generation they refer to as the war survivors. And now more and more, of course, are passing away every year. But that narrative, that wartime experience is ingrained and passed down generation to generation. And now it's often framed in this liberation narrative because it was US Marines who retook Guam from the Japanese Imperial Army. And I just want, very clear, like we're talking militaries to militaries, not cultures or individuals. And so the folks on Guam are really caught in the middle between these two warring militaries. And the war survivors who are still alive, wow, will share that the US Marines didn't even know that there was a civilian population here on the island. So to have a liberation parade happening every year and this narrative of patriotism and liberation and heroicism and white savior is very misleading. However, the World War II survivors are very grateful that the US Marines arrived. I'm saying all of this because this influences how people feel about the US military presence here today. It really depends on who you talk to, on which families, on their education, what their experiences are. I guess generally half the folks are happy the US military has such a major presence here and really see it as a security measure, whereas the other half of the population see the US military presence as actually endangering the island, endangering the water, endangering what adversaries in the Pacific could be because it's considered US soil. It is seen as if someone was to strike Guam, you would be striking the United States. And so once again, the local population is stuck between these warring nation states. Yeah.
Yeah, and something I think that's important as well that you haven't really touched upon in the presentation, but I know because I've been here, but also that wonderful article that you and Sheila Babauta wrote, which I'm pretty sure if people are interested in this topic, they could read that. It was a fantastic interview. So you can maybe, if people ask, you can also send them that link. But the fact that a lot of people here rely on the US military as a source for work, because there's really not much more you can do, right? So that also complicates the entire kind of situation because you rely on it for supplies, for work, for kind of a way of getting out of the island as well. But at the same time, you have all of the kind of like negative impacts as well.
Definitely. In that article, we are able to kind of unpack the fact that nearly every single family either has someone who is active duty, is a veteran, is enlisting, is somehow very involved in the armed services. And I guess what the flip side of that is, it's hard to have these conversations because it's almost framed as if you even mention it, you're considered anti-American or anti-military. But what is the common factor is the love of family, community. We need to look after each other. And I can almost say there's a complete agreement that the veterans who live here on Guam deserve better. We have billions of dollars happening in military projects, but veterans have to go to Hawaii for inpatient services. We have some of the highest per capita percentages of veterans and active service duty members, but there are not services for them on island. So it really kind of shows the priority. While there's all this priority for bombing ranges, there's no priority for folks who are serving in their own people, serving in the military. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something interesting. And maybe we can also touch upon, you mentioned it briefly before, the difference between, the two contexts, right? Guam and the CNMI, the Commonwealth of the Northern Mariana Islands, because they have very different histories. But then also like the situation, it's interesting that, even though they have two very different political statuses nowadays, and also two very different and complex histories. Now it seems like they're all kind of, they're all still Chamorro, and for many years there was a big separation between, Chamorros here on Guam and Chamorros in the CNMI. But now with all of these kind of like anti-resistance movements, anti-militarization movements, they're kind of starting to join together again, and kind of two very different histories, but one common kind of fight.
Yeah, I would say, I guess in my experience, the it's uniting the islands, but not in a way that perhaps the U.S. federal government intended. And I think it has to do with housing the Marines here, but using those islands for bombing practice. Yeah, and one of the justifications of using the rest of the Northern Marianas is the scenario which the Department of Defense put forward is if Guam was taken out, where would they be able to land their planes? That's when they're now interested in the Northern Marianas Islands. So usually it was, oh, the military, yeah, they just do that on Guam kind of thing. But now if you're coming to the CNMI, it's a whole different relationship and connection to land than it is for a non-self-governing territory. And so I think within that proposal, it just showed how the military conceptualizes the islands in terms of what the need is. And it's always in the name of national security. But that term doesn't include the Marianas Islands. Their concept of national security is the continental United States. Yeah. If I can ask you a question, in terms of your research and just your experience here in doing field work, when I was doing mine, I was always asking about questions of demilitarization and decolonization. So I constantly heard about that. I know your studies are coming from a different space. Can you share a little bit about if the topics of decolonization and demilitarization are presented in your work as well, or does it seem like it's almost a separate, thought?
I think there is a lot of overlap, because part of kind of like striving for self, for recovery of what it means to be Chamorro is also part of becoming more politically more, it's related to self-determination for sure, and that's goes hand in hand with demilitarization, right? And then I think it just all overlaps, as they're building new bases here on Guam, they're encountering artifacts, ancient Chamorro artifacts, and then it's what happens to those artifacts, right? Do they destroy them? Do they keep them? I know there's plans to make a kind of a museum or interpretation center in the new base, in the visitor center here on Guam, which is something, that the US military and the Guam government are working together on, which is very interesting. But yeah, there is definitely kind of like overlap all the time. And, you really can't talk about culture without talking about politics here.
All right. We have about 3 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know, I'm aware about time.
Any
Yay.
other
So
questions or
yeah,
things you'd like to share?
maybe just one final question, kind of it's very broad and, you know, maybe you don't have to answer. But I was wondering, you know, in your work with the activists, how do you think like art has an impact? Kind of like, how do artists impact the whole movement?
Art is resistance. Yeah. That's really what probably came out of like the research. So the concept of resistance studies, so frequently it's from a Western perspective, and it's, you know, mass number of people in the streets, yeah, nonviolent actions, but sustained over a period of time, you know, Occupy Wall Street, all of these mass movements, which isn't relevant for here. You have a very strong social order of respect. You respect your elders. You don't want to speak out. You don't want to humiliate your family. So art has always been, when I'm learning, a space to express resistance. And now with new media technologies and fast speed internet, media literacy, access to these tablets and devices, it's more central. And it's a way not just to connect with folks across the Marianas, but across Oceania, and then the folks who live in the continental United States. So more Chamorros actually live in the continental United States than here. But through this art activism using digital media, they're able to connect and collaborate and really just educate. Art is so central. Like, yes, you may be coming together for the art, but it's the conversations and the learning and unlearning that happens around the artifacts, as well as the new art that's happening.
Wonderful.
Yay. Okay.
This was great.
This is so good. So
Yeah.
I hope I get to come there and visit sometime in person, and anyone is welcome to come. Alba can give, an in-person review when she's back in the UK, but maybe just end with Sus Masi. Thank you so much.
Yes, it was Masi.
Okay.